We're going to use the definition of the derivative to differentiate f of x equal to secant of x. To do it, we'll require three results. The first one is the trig identity. Cosine of x plus h equals cosine of x times cosine of h minus sine of x times sine of h. The second result is limit h approaches 0 of sine of h over h is equal to 1, and the third result, limit h approaches 0, 1 minus cosine of h divided by h is equal to 0. Results 2 and 3 were shown in earlier videos, so you can look them up in case you forgot how to derive them. Recall the definition of the derivative is f prime of x equals limit as h approaches 0, f of x plus h minus f of x divided by h. So in our case, the derivative of secant is f prime of x equals the limit as h approaches 0, secant of x plus h minus secant of x divided by h. Now if we plug in 0 for h, we get 0 over 0. So what we have to do next is to express secant as 1 over cosine. So this is now limit as h approaches 0, 1 divided by cosine of x plus h minus 1 divided by cosine of x divided by h. Now let's look at the numerator. 1 divided by cosine of x plus h. We'll multiply it by cosine x over cosine x minus 1 divided by cosine of x, and we'll multiply that by cosine of x plus h over cosine of x plus h. So this is now equal to cosine of x minus cosine of x plus h divided by cosine of x plus h times cosine of x. So we return here to the limit. It now looks like this. Limit as h approaches 0, cosine of x minus cosine of x plus h divided by cosine of x plus h times cosine of x divided by h. Now this further simplifies because this h can just slide right here next to this product of cosine x plus h and cosine x, and this is now limit h approaches 0, cosine of x minus cosine of x plus h divided by h times cosine of x plus h times cosine of x. Now we're going to use trig identity since we have cosine of x plus h in the numerator and in the denominator. You may wonder, should we use that identity on both? But the answer is no. We just need to use it on the one in the numerator. The one in the denominator, it will not play any role until the very end. So leave the denominator cosine of x plus h alone. This now looks like limit h goes to 0, cosine of x minus cosine of x times cosine of h minus sine of x times sine of h. And the denominator doesn't change. It's still h times cosine of x plus h times cosine of x. Now this is equal to, the numerator looks like this. This is limit h goes to 0, cosine of x minus cosine of x times cosine of h, and minus a minus plus sine of x times sine of h divided by, still the denominator is h times cosine of x plus h times cosine of x. Now the next step, you can see that in the numerator we have two terms that have cosine of x in them. We can factor out cosine of x. Limit h goes to 0. Factoring cosine of x, we get 1 minus cosine of h, and then plus sine of x times sine of h, and the denominator is still h cosine x plus h times cosine of x. Next step, we'll break this up into two limits. The first limit is the limit h approaches 0, cosine of x times 1 minus cosine of h divided by h times cosine of x plus h times cosine of x. Notice that we can cancel these two cosines of x, plus the limit h approaches 0, sine of x sine of h divided by h times cosine of x plus h times cosine of x. So now let's finish this up. Look at the first limit. The first limit we can break up into two limits, product of two limits. This is limit as h approaches 0. First we have 1 minus cosine of h over h times limit as h approaches 0, 1 divided by cosine of x plus h. And the second limit we can do likewise. Notice that we have sine x over cosine x. That doesn't depend on h, so we can factor that. That's tangent of x. That's this sine right over here and over this cosine right here. Then we have limit h approaches 0 of sine of h over h. And finally the limit h approaches 0, 1 over cosine of x plus h. Now result number 3, this is that limit and it is 0. So this is 0 times, doesn't matter what the second one is, as h goes to 0, 1 over cosine of x plus h is 1 over cosine of x, which is secant of x. So 0 times secant of x, plus we have tangent of x, and limit h goes to 0 of sine h over h is the result number 2. That's 1, so times 1. And then we have limit h goes to 0, 1 over cosine x plus h. That's also 1 over cosine of x, which is secant of x. So now we have derived the derivative of secant. And let's summarize this. This is equal to 0 times secant is 0. Tangent times secant is tangent secant. But usually we write secant first. We write secant x times tangent x. So to summarize, if our function is f of x equals to secant of x, its derivative, as we just saw by definition, is secant of x times tangent of x.